In the third week of the great heat, when the thermometer on the shady side of the store in Ashgrove had stood above 100 for 19 days, and the nights had stopped cooling at all, old Ottilie Vance went from house to house through that township, telling people to stop sleeping in their own beds. She told them to take their children down into their root cellars at noon and keep them there until the sun was off the west wall. She told them to hang wet sheets across the windows and to sleep on the ground outside after midnight, and to stop drinking well water in gulps, and to stop letting their men work through the middle of the day whatever needed doing. She was 71 years old, and she was foreign, and she lived alone at the end of the section road with a goat, and about half that township did what she said. The other half was polite to her and went on as they were. By the end of that August, in the half that listened, there were sick people, and there were people who would not soon forget how the heat had felt. But they were alive. In the half that did not, there were 4 fresh graves in the Ashgrove burying ground, and 3 of them were children under 6 years old. And old Ottilie Vance dug the flowers for those graves out of her own dooryard and planted them herself, and never once, then or afterward, said to any of those parents the thing that everybody knew she had the right to say. I want to be careful telling this, because it is a story about a heat wave, which does not sound like a disaster in the way a blizzard or a fire sounds like one. And that is precisely why it killed people. Nobody in that country was afraid of summer. They were afraid of January. Every family on the plains had a whole system of knowledge and habit and dread built up around the cold, because the cold announced itself. The cold came with a wall of black cloud and a wind you could hear coming, and the cold made a person's danger obvious to them from the first minute. Heat does not do that. Heat comes in on a bright, clear morning that looks exactly like the morning before it. Heat kills in a room with the sun coming in the window and a clock ticking. It works on a person for days before it does anything you can see. And by the time a body is in real trouble, the mind that would have saved it is already gone soft and stupid. And the person will tell you they are fine and mean it. That was what Ottilie Vance understood, and nobody else in Ashgrove did. And she had learned it in a place none of them had ever been. She had been born in Hungary, on the great plain there, the Puszta, the flat grassland country that runs east from the Danube. And if you have never heard anyone say that the Hungarian plain and the American plain are sister country, you have now, because they are. And she said it often. Same flatness, same enormous sky, same wind, and the same brutal continental summers, which the people of that country had been living through for 1,000 years, and had accordingly worked out, in the slow accumulating way of peasants, exactly how to survive. She had come to America at 54, a widow, following a son who then died of a burst appendix within 2 years of her arrival, which is the kind of thing that happened constantly then and never gets into stories. So she stayed, because she had nothing to go back for, and she took a small piece of ground at the end of the section road in Ashgrove Township, and kept a goat and a garden, and did fine sewing for money, and she was regarded by that community as a harmless and slightly comic old foreign woman, and she was invited to things and given jars of preserves, and never, in 17 years, once consulted about anything. There were 2 things about Ottilie Vance's own place that everybody in Ashgrove remarked on, and that everybody explained to themselves as old country peculiarity, and that were in fact the entire body of knowledge that was about to save half that township. The first was her house, which was not a house exactly. She had built, or had built for her the first year, a small frame house like anybody's, but she had dug out under and behind it a proper cellar room, much bigger than a root cellar needed to be, going back into the low rise her place sat against, with a second entrance from outside covered by a slanting door. It was cool down there in a way that surprised people who went in. She kept her milk and butter in it and her preserves, and she also kept a bed in it, a plain cot with a straw tick, and in the summer she slept down there, and in the hot part of the day she sat down there and did her sewing by a lamp rather than in the good daylight upstairs. People thought that was odd. Some of them thought it was a little sad, an old woman sitting in a hole in the ground. The second thing was the water. She kept, on the shaded north side of her house, a row of unglazed earthenware jars, porous clay, always sweating, always damp on the outside, and she kept her drinking water in those and nowhere else, and she kept a wet cloth over the mouth of each one. In the worst of the summer, she would set a wide pan of water in the doorway of the cellar and hang a piece of sacking so that the air coming in had to pass over it. She had brought 2 of those clay jars all the way from Hungary. They were the only things she had brought, except her clothes and her husband's watch. And here is the thing about her that people mostly noticed and made gentle fun of, and I am going to tell it now because it comes back at the end. Ottilie Vance kept the hours of a country that no longer existed around her. She was up and working in the dark, hours before dawn, so that her real day's labor, the garden and the goat, and anything heavy, was done by 8 in the morning. Then she disappeared. From about 9 until 5, she was simply not seen. She was below, in the cellar, sewing by lamplight or sleeping. And then she came out in the evening and worked again, in the long dusk, and sat outside in the dark until very late. Her lamp was often burning at midnight, and her house was dark and shut at 11 in the morning, and the neighbors joked that old Ottilie kept owl's hours, and that she had her days and nights turned around, and one of the Krause boys used to say she was probably a vampire, which he thought was extremely funny, and which his mother made him stop saying. Nobody understood that they were watching a woman follow, in every particular, a survival routine 1,000 years old. Now I will tell you about the summer of that year and how it came on, because the coming on is important. It began in the ordinary way. June was warm and dry, and everybody said the corn liked it. The first week of July was hot, and there was some complaining, and the wheat came off early. And then, in the second week of July, a high pressure sat down over the whole middle of the country, and it did not move for 6 weeks. The thing about a heat dome, which is what we would call it now and what they had no name for at all, is that it does not simply make the days hot, it stops the weather. The wind died. The clouds that build up in an ordinary prairie afternoon and give you a thunderstorm by supper stopped building, because the air above was pressing down and would not let them. Day after day after day, the sky came up white, blue, and empty, and stayed that way, and the sun came over and went across and went down, and the next morning it did it again. By the 3rd week of July, it was over 100 every day. By the last week of July, it was 105 and 107, and the ground had baked so hard that a spade rang on it, and the corn had rolled its leaves up tight like green cigars, which is what corn does when it is trying to save itself. And there was dust standing in the road that did not settle, because there was no wind to move it, and nothing to make it fall. And the nights stopped cooling. That is the part that killed people, and it is the part that nobody outside of a hot country understands. A human body can take a great deal of heat in the daytime if it is allowed to unload that heat at night. All the ordinary heat of an ordinary prairie summer is survivable because the sun goes down and the dry air lets the day's heat radiate away, and by 2 in the morning it is 65 degrees and everything alive lies down and recovers. What happened in that August was that the ground itself, everything, the earth and the buildings and the road, had absorbed so much heat over so many consecutive days that it could no longer give it all back before sunrise. The nights bottomed out at 85, then 88. Inside a closed-frame house with a shingle roof upstairs, where everybody in America slept, it did not get below 95 at any hour of the night for 11 straight nights. So people went to bed exhausted in a room hotter than blood heat, and did not recover, and got up more tired than they lay down, and did it again. And each day they started a little further behind, and after about a week of that, a body begins to fail, and it fails fastest in the very young and the very old, whose systems have the least reserve, and it fails without any drama at all. Ottilie Vance began going house to house in the 3rd week. I want to describe what she actually did, because this is the substance of it, and because the picture people have of a heat wave is a person fanning themselves, and the reality is a set of specific physical procedures that work. She told them to move down. Every house in that township had some kind of cellar or dugout, if only a shallow one for potatoes, because that country had tornadoes, and everybody had a hole of some sort. She told them that the earth 6 feet down is 55 degrees in that country in any season, and that a cellar is not merely a cooler room, it is a fundamentally different climate, and that they were to take the babies and the old people down there from mid-morning until evening every day and stay, not visit, stay. She told them to sleep outside after midnight, on the ground, on a quilt, in the yard, which struck many of those people as indecent and improper and something poor foreigners did. And she told them that the ground at 2 in the morning was cooler than any bedroom upstairs, and that the open air let a body shed heat, and that the reason their children were listless and hot-eyed at breakfast was that their children had not actually rested in 9 days. She told them about the wet sheets, which was the one they took to fastest because it was easy and looked like housekeeping. Hang a sheet soaked in well water across the open window on the shaded side. The air coming in through the wet cloth arrives cooler, meaningfully cooler, because the water takes the heat out of it as it evaporates. Wet it again every hour. She had them do the same over the cellar entrance. She told them about the water itself, and this was the instruction that got the most argument. She told them to drink small amounts, constantly, all day, whether thirsty or not, and to put a pinch of salt in the day's first pitcher. Everybody knew about drinking water in the heat. What they did not know, and what she insisted on, was the constancy of it, and the salt, and the fact that thirst is a late signal and a bad one, that a person working in that heat is losing water faster than thirst will tell them, and that by the time a man feels he must drink, he is already behind and will not catch up that day. And she told the men to stop working in the middle of the day. That was the hardest, and it was where she failed most often. There is a moral structure in a farming community about work, and it is not a foolish one. It is what keeps such a place alive, and it holds that a man who is not working in the daylight when there is work to do is idle, and idleness is shameful. She was asking men to be seen sitting in a hole in the ground at noon in August with the hay down. Some of them did it. Many of them nodded and thanked her, and went out at 1 in the afternoon to work, because they could not bear not to. Now, she was not received as a prophet, and I want to give the honest shape of how that township took her, because it was not simple hostility, and it was not simple gratitude. She was heard, in the first place, only because of 2 things that had nothing to do with her being right. The first was that by the 3rd week, people were frightened. Not of dying, they were not there yet, but of the strangeness of it, and frightened people will listen to almost anybody who speaks with certainty. The second was Mattie Rolke, who was the closest thing that township had to a leading woman, 45, sharp, 6 children, a farm that ran well, and whose word carried. Mattie Rolke took her own children into the cellar on the first day Ottilie asked, not because she believed the science of it, which nobody had explained to her, but because she looked at old Ottilie Vance's face and thought, this woman is not being fanciful. This woman has seen something. That was the entire mechanism by which half a township was saved. One respected woman looked at an old foreigner's face and decided to take her seriously. Everything else followed from that. The half that did not listen did not refuse out of stupidity either, and this is the part I have thought about for many years. They refused because what she was asking looked like giving up. It looked like weakness and superstition and foreign fussing. There was a strong current in that country, and it was, in some ways, an admirable current, that a person endured things. You did not hide from weather, you got on with it. Men who had come through the war and the grasshopper years and the winter of 1881 were not going to take to their cellars because it was hot. The word people used, when they talked about it afterward, ashamed, was that it had felt babyish. There was a second thing, too, and it was practical and awful. Taking the family into the cellar from 10 until 6 meant somebody was not doing 8 hours of work a day at the very season when a farm's whole year is decided. Hay, harvest, stock, garden, all of it. A family that lost 3 weeks of daylight labor in August might genuinely be in trouble in February. It was not a free choice for them. That is the cruelty of it, and any honest telling has to say so. Some of those families were not being stubborn. They were making a calculation about the winter, and they made it in a fog of heat exhaustion that had already begun to spoil their judgment. I can give you 1 day out of the middle of it, the 9th of August, because 2 families in this country have told their piece of that day so many times that the whole of it can be set side by side, and side by side is the only way it means anything. At the Rulke place, they were up at 2:30 in the morning. Mattie Rulke has said that the strangest part of that August was how normal the middle of the night came to feel. The whole family moving around the yard by lantern in the dark. The boys at the stock, the girls carrying water, everybody working hard in air that was only just bearable, and the dark full of the sounds of other people's lanterns 1/2 mile off doing the same thing. They had the cows milked and the stock watered and the garden picked by first light. They ate at sunrise. By 8, the wet sheets were up on the east windows and re-wetted, and by 9:30, when the sun came over the top of the cottonwoods and the light went hard and white, Mattie Rulke put 6 children down the cellar steps and went after them, and the door was shut, and that was the end of their day above ground. She has described what that cellar was like, and it was not pleasant. It was 58 degrees and damp, and it smelled of earth and potatoes and lamp oil, and 6 children and a grown woman in a space 14 feet by 10 for 8 hours is not a holiday. They were bored past bearing. They quarreled. The younger ones cried from sheer confinement. Maddie set the older girls to mending and taught the little ones their letters on a slate and told every story she knew twice. And at about 2 in the afternoon, most days, they all simply slept, because a body will sleep when it is finally cool enough to, and that sleep was the thing that was keeping them alive, and none of them knew it. 2 miles east, at a farm I am not going to name because the family is still here, the 9th of August went the way it had gone all summer. They were up at 5, which is early by any ordinary reckoning, and was 3 hours too late that month. The men were in the hay by 7. By 10, the 2 youngest children were indoors, upstairs, out of the sun, which every instinct tells a mother is the safe place, and which was, in fact, the most dangerous room on that farm. There was a wet sheet on one window, because they had taken that part of the advice. It was the easy part. It had been hung the previous evening, and nobody re-wetted it, so by noon it was a dry sheet on a window and doing nothing at all. At 2 in the afternoon that day, the men came in from the field for dinner, and one of them, a hired man of about 30, sat down at the table and could not remember what he had come in for, and was cheerful about it, and made a joke, and ate almost nothing, and went back out at 3. That is what the beginning of it looks like, not collapse. A cheerful man who has misplaced the last 20 minutes and does not think it is worth mentioning. He was lucky. 2 of the older boys noticed something wrong with him at about 5, and made him sit in the horse trough, which is not the recommended treatment, but is a great deal better than nothing, and he was sick for 2 days and then recovered. The children upstairs in that house were not in the trough, and nobody thought to look at them the way the boys had looked at the hired man, because they were quiet, and a quiet child in the heat looks like a good child. Ottilie Vance came to that farm on the 10th. She had been there before, twice. She looked at the dry sheet on the window, and she went up those stairs, an old woman of 71, and put her hand on the wall of that upstairs room at 11 in the morning, and then she came down and told the mother of that house what the temperature was in the room where her children were sleeping in the afternoons, and what it was doing to them. She was, by all accounts, not gentle about it that time. It is the only occasion anybody remembers Ottilie Vance being sharp with a neighbor. They moved the children down that same day, and those particular children lived. I want to say that clearly, because I have made that family sound careless, and they were not careless. They were doing what everyone they had ever known had done in a hot summer, and when it was put to them plainly by somebody who had walked into their house and gone up their own stairs, they changed it inside of an hour. The families where it went wrong were the ones where nobody went up the stairs. The first death was on the 28th of July, an old man named Harold, who was 83 and had been failing anyway, and the doctor from Beaverton wrote down heart, and that was true, and it was also not the whole truth, and nobody thought much about it. The second was on the 4th of August, and it was the Loomis baby, 14 months old, upstairs in a bedroom at 3 in the afternoon. And after that, the township was afraid in a way it had not been. I am going to pass over the 2 weeks that followed as briefly as I decently can, because there is no good in dwelling on it, and because everyone who is old enough to remember that August in this county already knows. 2 more children died in the 2nd week of August, the Dietz girl, who was 5, and the Pelke child, and both of them died in ordinary bedrooms in ordinary houses, to which nobody had brought a wet sheet or a cellar bed, and both of them died in families that had been visited by Ottilie Vance, and had been kind to her, and had not done what she said. And in the houses that had done what she said, there was misery, and there was fear, and there was one bad night with the Rulke's youngest, that Matty Rulke has never talked about, and everybody lived. The heat broke on the 23rd of August with a line of thunderstorms out of the northwest that people came out of their houses to stand in, and the temperature fell 30 degrees in 2 hours, and that was the end of it. What Ashgrove did afterward was quiet and slow, and had almost no ceremony in it. Nobody made a speech about Ottilie Vance. There was no meeting where anybody stood up. What happened instead was that over the next 2 years, without any of it being organized, the cellars of that township changed. Men dug them deeper and bigger and put in second entrances and steps instead of ladders, and framed a bed space along one wall. And Matti Rölke had hers whitewashed. Nobody said, "This is the summer cellar." They said we were needing more root space anyway. And in the summers that followed, when the hot spells came, and they came, that township went underground at noon as a matter of course. And by the time those children were grown, it was simply what people did in Ashgrove in August, and where it had come from was not discussed. The families who had lost children did not blame her and did not thank her, and there was nothing there for anybody to say. She had come to their doors and told them, and they had not done it. That fact sat between those families and that old woman for the rest of her life, and everybody involved had the sense to leave it alone. She went to all 3 of the children's funerals. She sat at the back. She brought food, as women did. And here is the thing she did that this county has remembered longer than anything else. And it is the reason I said at the start that she never once said the thing she had the right to say. In the September after, she dug up the flowering plants from along her own south wall, the ones she had carried as seed from Hungary and grown every year of her 17 years in that country, and she divided the roots, and she planted them on the 3 children's graves herself, on her knees, at 71, and she tended them for the remaining 9 years of her life. They are still there. Somebody has always kept them going. They are not native to this country, and everyone in the Ashgrove burying ground knows which graves they are on. What I would draw out of it is this, and Ottilie Vance said something like it once, and only once, to Matti Rölke, sitting on Matti's porch in the cool of an evening the following summer. Matti had said something about how she wished the whole township had listened, and Ottilie Vance said that they had all listened. She said the trouble was not that they did not hear her. The trouble was that she was asking them to be afraid of a bright morning, and that people can be afraid of a black cloud coming at them across the field, because their bodies do that for them without being asked. But nobody can be afraid of sunshine on their own doorstep, and so it has to be done with the mind instead, on purpose, against everything the body is telling you, and most people cannot do that about anything, ever. Then she said, and this is the line this county has kept, that the cold kills the careless, but the heat kills the brave. She died at 80, in her cellar, in July, in her sleep, which was where she had slept every summer night for 26 years, and she was found by Matti Rölke's daughter, and the goat, which was a different goat by then, was standing in the doorway. Now, Ottilie Vance and Ashgrove are ours, but here is what is true, and it is worth knowing because it has not changed. Extreme heat kills more people in this country than any other kind of weather, more than tornadoes and floods and cold, and it always has, and it does it quietly enough that it is routinely underestimated. The mechanism in this story is the real one. Prolonged heat with no nighttime cooling is far deadlier than hot days alone, because the body recovers at night and cannot when the night stays hot, and the danger accumulates over days. The most vulnerable are infants, the very old, the ill, and people working outdoors, in that order. And confusion and poor judgment are early signs of heat illness, which is exactly why people in danger so often insist that they are fine. Every measure the old woman teaches is genuine. Below-ground rooms hold a stable cool temperature year-round. Evaporative cooling through wet cloth over an opening measurably lowers the air coming through in dry climates. Porous, unglazed clay vessels keep water cool by the same principle and have been used for that purpose across hot regions for thousands of years. Steady small intakes of water with some salt, rather than waiting for thirst, is correct. And shifting heavy labor to the hours before dawn and after sunset is the oldest and most effective heat practice there is, followed by farming and working people in hot countries all over the world. The Hungarian plain, the puszta, really is climatically kin to the American plains, and immigrants from hot summer countries genuinely did arrive with practical knowledge that their new neighbors lacked and often disregarded. This story involves the deaths of children from heat, which is a heavy thing to hear, and if it touches something in your own life, please be gentle with yourself in the hearing of it. The people are imagined, the heat, the sleepless hot nights, and every one of the old woman's remedies are exactly as they were.